Yeah, well, let's dig in. Hello, everybody. I'm David Cooks, and I tell you what, we know that paralysis can take on many forms. It can be physical, like mine, or it can be psychological. You put your mind to. And what we try to do is feature stories that go from difficult places to fulfilling purpose. What seems impossible can be done by you. He is the founder of the Trauma and Recovery Program. He's a veteran of the Afghanistan War. It may knock you down, but don't let it stop you. He currently is involved with Parents for Peace, an outstanding organization. And he also was the Imperial Nighthawk for the Ku Klux Klan.
There's a picture out there of me sitting on this dilapidated shack porch that I lived in with my wife and 2 kids. That was all I could afford because the other money I made, I had to buy my drugs with. And he was hugging me. And I remember, you can tell, just like I was so red in the head from just like ugly crying into this complete stranger's neck. He didn't care. He just hugged me tighter. I needed a hug, man. And to think that this was like this really happy and happy ending story, it wasn't. It was ugly. I pulled a gun on Arno, and I had become just as addicted to the hate as I was to the meth and to the heroin and to the substances. Got so much to give, a lot of life to live. You must go from paralysis to purpose. Get your pen and paper out. Yeah, I'm taking notes. Paralysis to purpose. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Paralysis to Purpose to Podcast. I am your host, David Cooks. Easy for me to say. Let me thank you. If you haven't already, please like, share, leave a review, let someone else know about the podcast, and that will help me as well. I say this every week, and this week is no exception. I love this job because I get to speak with some of the most intriguing and inspiring people in the world. And today is no exception. I first saw his story maybe a year ago. I'm not even sure. It was on ABC News one night. And I'm like, oh man, I need to talk to this guy. And turns out that some people know him that knew me. And so we got it done. So I'm really excited about today. Let me tell you a little bit about our guest. He is the founder of the TRP, which is Trauma and Recovery Program. He's going to talk about that today. He is a veteran of the Afghanistan War. Thank you for your service, sir. And we'll talk about that as well. And he currently is involved with Parents for Peace, which is an outstanding organization. He also was the Imperial Nighthawk for the Ku Klux Klan. I'm excited to have Chris Buckley with us here today. Chris, welcome to Paralysis to Purpose to Podcast. Thank you for having me. It's an honor and a privilege to be here with you.
Well, I'm excited. Your journey and story has been told, and but not to my listeners. So we're going to try to see what we can find out different from some of the other people. For those of you who are faithful listeners, you probably recall a couple of episodes in season 1 that featured Pardeep Kalaka and Arnos Michaelis. And it turns out that both of those guys know Chris. And they actually are working together on a number of things that we'll touch on today. So, Chris, I just want to begin and let listeners know, I want you to pay close attention today because you're going to hear a lot about perspective, you're going to hear a lot about perseverance, and you're going to hear a lot about partnerships, all 3 of those components. And so we're going to talk about that a little bit. Chris, I want to start with you as a child, your family. And the reason I do this is a lot of times, when a child or someone goes down a dark path, a lot of times there are assumptions made that they weren't raised properly and all that kind of stuff. Sometimes that's true, sometimes that's not. But here on Paralysis to Purpose, I like to know what the real deal is. So tell us about your childhood and how you grew up, and then we'll get into your decision to join the military.
Yeah, I grew up in Cleveland, Ohio, and was born in 1983. Amazing time to grow up and be alive. Just the things that don't exist anymore that existed in my childhood growing up, I miss. I guess I could start off with some of the earliest memories I have growing up is that my dad was absent a lot. He worked a lot of overtime. My dad was a heavy drinker. When I was born, he was using drugs.
So he would come home on Fridays, drop money off to my mom, and then stay gone for 3-4 days till he ran out of money at the bar, and usually come home beat up, have a black eye. I need to contextualize that. My mom was 16, my dad was 18 when they got pregnant with me. Me and my dad always had a really abrasive and conflictual type of relationship. And I always felt like I wasn't really wanted. You know what I mean? Like, I felt like, and even more so as I grew up, as I got older and I was able to develop and be able to, form complex thoughts and things, 10, 12, 15, 18 years old. So there's that. My dad was a very behind closed doors racist type of person. So like there was a lot of racial language and rhetoric and ideology going on behind the doors of the family dynamic. My dad blamed the Latino and the Hispanic community for the fact that he couldn't get a job, but never really wanted to blame the fact that dad had a drinking problem and would show up to work smelling like alcohol, or missed too much work, or was unreliable at work and a loose cannon with a temper. So nobody wanted to hire that or keep it on. My mom worked a lot. So I was raised by my grandma on my dad's side. And that woman was an angel on earth. She was my mom, my dad, my best friend. She was everything a parent was supposed to be. So that was my life growing up. About 5, I started to be molested by a very close family member of the same sex. And that went on for years, no matter how bad it got. I was taken to a counselor. The counselor suggested that I was being molested. My parents were like, oh, no. I even told my mom one time, and my dad, overheard the conversation because I just broke down at like 9 years old and like became suicidal, was just like really having problems in school, really having problems in like my social constructs, and was being like, aggressively molested daily. So my dad, being the hothead alcoholic, drug addict that he was, instantly walks into the bedroom, starts loading a shotgun, and my mom's like, you have to tell him you're lying. You have to, or he's going to kill your uncle and he's going to go to prison. And 9-year-old me was like, I don't want my dad to go away. I mean, he's gone enough as it is. Like, I'll never get to see him. And all I ever craved for was my dad's approval. Right. So there's that. And then during the mid-90s, there was a busing reform type of project that was going on in the city. The city council had this great idea that because the city was segregated on its own recognizance, that they wanted to bring black kids from the east side to the white schools on the west side and vice versa, and ship them over there. So I remember I never had a brand new pair of shoes ever in my life. And always hand-me-downs from other cousins and stuff because there was still wear left in them. Kids grow a lot when they're young. So a brand new pair of shoes still outgrown here is still brand new here. So I remember it was right around the time that Jordan come out with the Jumpmans, right?
Yeah.
And they were the all black ones with the blue toes and the blue heel and the white strip in the side. High tops had the Jordan on them. And this is back in the time that East Bay magazine was out, right? So we would get the magazine and we're all looking at the shoes on the front porch, me and all my friends. And my grandmother noticed, and we would always talk about everything except for the molestation. Like, we never really talked about that. And I kind of look back on it. It's like, if I told her, would something have been different? But we're sitting at the table one night. We're eating dinner because it was a really big deal at Mama's house to eat dinner at the table together. She would cook. Me, Papa, and Mama at the table eating dinner. And she pulled that magazine out from her purse and she sat it on the table. She was like, you look at this an awful lot, son. What is it that you're looking for? And I was like, I just look at the shoes. They're nice. And, so she goes, well, show me the ones you like. This is at the beginning of summer. And She saved. She was on a fixed income, retired. So she saved every month till she had enough to buy those Jumpmans. And I remember the first day I wore those was the first day of my new school on the east side of Cleveland. And I didn't make it off the bus that day. And I was gotten by about 6 kids, some 6th graders and 7th graders, bigger kids, and some kids in my grade. And they beat me up. They took the shoes. I was peed on. And the one kid slipped off a pair of Jordan slides and he kicked them at me. He said, "You can walk a mile in my shoes, cracker." And I was like, "Oh my God, like this would never happen in my school." And I got angry. I remember that was the first time that I felt any kind of anger towards somebody other than homosexuals, right? Homosexuals harmed me. They injured me. In my mind, at 9 years old, they're all going to try to hurt kids. And so that was my take on it. And
so let's I want to unpack a few of these things, because you just said a lot of things that has happened by the time you were 9 years old. You talked about all you really wanted was your dad's affirmation and his love. That's all you were looking for.
Hey, man. Still to this day.
Even to this day. As a kid, why did that become so apparent to you as a need even before the molestation began?
Man, I just needed my dad. I needed to learn so much that I just didn't have. I needed that bond with that male figure in my life. I was a young boy, and like I seen all my friends with their dads, and so like the only thing that me and my dad ever did together that like I can look back on that wasn't horrible was hunting. He was really big into the outdoors. So like I look forward to that. I would be up before him and like getting dressed and getting all my stuff, and he'd come walking out of the bedroom, and we would go. And funny because like even though hunting is one of those things that are like extremely bonding for a father and son, or a grandfather and a grandson, or even an uncle and a nephew, like it's ingrained in our DNA to be hunter-gatherers since the beginning of the human documentation, right? That's what we did for survival. So to tap into that primal instinct, do it with somebody that is the utmost important in your life, that you put on a pedestal, that you want to emulate. Like that's a father's job, is to teach their son what's okay, what's not okay, how to survive.
Well, so you, it's interesting. You talk about survival, because I think that became part of your modus operandi as you begin to get older. I
was always in survival mode, man. Like It was just constant survival mode for me.
So, so your dad wasn't present for you. Your grandmother did the best she could.
She did better than the best she could. She did. She was a saint.
Yeah.
And, there's no words to describe how much she did for me.
And I think we talk about how people are assigned to our lives on our journeys, and your grandmother you were part of her assignment, and she fulfilled that assignment. And it's amazing because you had what you needed just to get through, even though things were still murky. Things were still crazy. You had something to hold on to, because without that,
I would have been gone.
And so the molestation caused you to view homosexuals in a certain way because of the pain that you had experienced. And now you get bullied. So I'm listening to you from 5 to 9, where you've gone from wanting the love of your dad that you can't get, and he's drinking and doing what he does, to molestation, to getting bullied. And the very first new pair of shoes that you got them taken from you in a situation where
I had no control.
You had no control.
Like I was vulnerable and yeah. And like, I think it's very important to note that my dad was very abusive physically. Like even at that early age, like for the most minute things, I would be like beaten.
Right.
There were days where I just couldn't go to school because I had a big gash on the top of my head. And rather than send me to school, we butterflied it until it healed. And then I would go back to school to keep child protective services out of the mix. And so I want to emphasize that wasn't uncommon for a lot of the kids growing up. Like us kids bonded together over those things. Like we all experienced it. Every one of my friends were experiencing like a physically abusive or alcoholic parent or drug addict parent or absent parent. Like, so we were each other's lifeline in that neighborhood. When we would get together after school, we would stay out as late as we could to avoid going home. And, you know, it's pitch black and we're out there still hitting baseballs in an abandoned field, you know, and it's like, so, I mean, there was good things too.
It's interesting. You said you guys became the lifeline for each other.
Like we just played together, you know what I mean? Like we didn't have a name. We didn't like, you know, get into like the illegal stuff. We played baseball.
You guys stuck together and again, partnership, trying to help you get through, even though you all were experiencing the same thing, not able to process it as clearly as you needed to, but you had enough there to hold each other together to try to have some sort of life that was going to have some pleasure to it. So, you know, things were tough. What would you say during that time between, you know, 5 and graduating from high school? What were some of your fondest moments? What do you sit back and reflect and say, man, I remember that was a good time, or that was a great person, or, you know?
I mean, I had it rough, man, and I don't want to victimize myself and say, oh, well, there was nothing good. So I mean, like, there are few memories in my pre-18 year life that were very memorable and fun. So one of them would just be a collective memory of just my grandmother as just the force in my life. Everything we ever did together is just written in time in my mind, and I visit that a lot. I would have to say there were 3 times in my entire life, and I'm 39, that my father ever told me he was proud of me. The first time was when I shot my first deer. He turned into a different man. He was loving and excited, and we celebrated. And I had my first beer that night. There was ritual with it. Like I had to wear the deer blood all night. I had to clean it myself. Like I was so excited, and I felt like one of the guys. Like it was a ritual, a rite of passage. The other time was when I come home from basic training and I graduated. I'm proud of you. Thanks, man. It was tough, and like I appreciated that he was proud of me. And at the end of the day, it's all I ever want is just to hear those 3 words or 4 words. I'm proud of you. And the last time was when I come home from Afghanistan. That one was like I changed while I was there, man. So when I come home and he's like, "I'm proud of you," and I'm like, "For what, bro? Not dying? Gee, thanks." You know, like I mean. Like it was different, and the damaged me started to lash back out at that toxic relationship. All those years. Mm-hmm. So I would say that's the other 2 or 3 times. And then, I mean, there was a time my mom was pregnant with my sister, 9 months pregnant, and I loved the zoo. I loved animals. I loved nature. And it was raining and windy and nasty, but it was supposed to clear up. And she took me to the zoo that day, and we walked to the bus stop. And I remember her arching her back, trying to support her belly to get me to the zoo, walked me all around that zoo all day and brought me home. And I remember that. So
Wow. Let me say, those are great memories, man. Those are really, really great memories. You talked about enrolling into the armed forces, and I want to take a quick break here and pick it up from there and talk a little bit about that. And then also, I want to find out a little bit about, when did you start to think that the Ku Klux Klan was a place you needed to be?
Oh, yeah.
Because somewhere in between all of that anger, rejection, pain, and disappointment came a different kind of gang, which wasn't playing baseball.
No.
We're going to come back and talk about that with Chris right here on Paralysis to Purpose, the podcast.
We hope you're enjoying Paralysis to Purpose, the podcast. Be sure to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok at Paralysis to Purpose for more updates. Also, check out David's website at davidcookspeaks.com to learn more about his mission and purchase his book, Getting Undressed, From Paralysis to Purpose.
We had left, and Chris had mentioned that he had returned from, one of his highlights was returning from Afghanistan, but he also mentioned he had some struggles when he got back. We want to start off by talking about your decision to join the military, and then what went into that, and then we'll talk about being in Afghanistan. And again, seriously, thank you for your service, man. Like, I really, really mean that, like, for real.
It was a privilege to put the uniform on and defend this country. So it was definitely a privilege.
With all of its flaws and injustices and everything, it is still.
It's what makes it beautiful.
What did you just say?
It's what makes it beautiful. It's easy to be in love with something for what it is, right? It takes effort to be in love with something for what it isn't.
Mm.
But that doesn't mean that we can't make it better.
And it doesn't mean you can't love it.
Well, you have to love it to want to make it better.
Are you a love doctor too?
No, I'm very damaged as an individual, and I had to learn to love myself before I wanted to make myself better. And I just apply that very basic realization to the whole of humanity. Right? Like, I have to, before I want to make something better, I have to love it. And I have to learn to love myself before I can love anything.
The Bible says it this way: love your neighbor as yourself. And I'm like, well, if you're going to love your neighbor right, you better love yourself right first. Yep. And then you can love them. And
it says to love your God with all your heart. And if you do those three things, you'll never do anything to harm your neighbor. You'll do nothing to harm yourself, and you'll do nothing to harm your God.
We just had church. This podcast goes all over the place. So this is what we do.
Yeah, dude, definitely.
So why did you originally go into the military?
So growing up with such animosity building towards my father and such a feeling of resentment that I got from him. I mean, like, by the time I was 17, I had kind of formed this idea in my mind that at such a young age, he wasn't intending on getting my mom pregnant. He was just looking for somebody to have fun with. She was 16. She was young. She was naive. He was 18. He was young. He was naive. And a baby happened. That baby. Well, I ruined this 19-year-old's life, which is why he wanted to party all the way through my childhood, because he wasn't ready to grow up. Mom did, man. Mom worked 2 jobs. She did everything she could to take care of me. And he always made it a point to tell me that the moment I thought you were there, I loved you. I never got that from my father, which tells me that the way I'm feeling about him must have been true. He resented the fact that I paused and halted his life. He didn't want to marry my mother. Grandmother made him. She said, you got that girl pregnant and knocked up. Your life is over. You are now a husband and a father, and you will take care of that family. Sometimes I wish you wouldn't have. Just let him go. So I mentioned in the earlier part of the podcast that I played baseball. That's what we did. So whenever one of us was suffering or struggling, we'd play baseball. We'd beat it out of the ball. And the process of that, I got really, really, really good at baseball. I played sports in high school. A lot of recruiters from big name colleges come to watch. My dad pushed me. You go to college for ball. Go play ball. Go do this. Go do that. I wanted to get as far away from there as possible. When I was 7, my parents got pregnant with my sister, and that was we're going to save our marriage. Another baby's going to fix it. And to me, I was like, oh, you mean the baby you wanted, not the baby you had. So out of a spite move, recruiters were just coming to the school. We were getting ready to graduate. We were starting to see like all the like at ball games, we were seeing the recruiters from college come in, and the other recruiters were coming too, the military guys. And I remember talking to them all, and they were like, "You're very athletic. I think you would do great in the military." And there was no wars going on, and I said, maybe I can go to college and do this too. And I was searching for a sort of strength and a way to have a purpose and something bigger than me. And I remember I decided that I was going to join the Army. I liked the Marines uniform better, but I wanted to join the Army. My grandpa, my papaw, my dad's side, was in the Navy during Hiroshima and Nagasaki. He was on a hospital ship. And so that kind of ruined me on the Navy, because that man just sat around like this until he died, drinking highball whiskeys and ginger ale. And I remember I come home and I was like, I want to join the Army. I was 17. My parents were like, absolutely not. You will not. We will not stand for that. And I remember I manipulated my mom a little bit. And I was like, look, you can sign for me at 17, or you can make me wait till I'm 18. I'm going to do it anyway. And I'm just going to resent you for the rest of my life for making me wait a year to do what I want to do. So she signed. It was done. Joined the Army, and I left. I said, I'm not crying or anything. We've got pollen and stuff going on in Georgia,
Yeah.
No, I'm definitely crying. It's a very emotional story, man. It brings back a lot of things I thought I was over, but I'm not. And so that was my introduction to the military. 17 years old, between my junior and senior year, I shipped off to basic training and did the delayed entry program, which means go to basic between my junior and senior year, come back, finish my senior year, go to AIT, and off to the military after my senior year. While everybody else is going to college, I'm going off to Army college and gonna go be a soldier.
So you go to the Army and you get there. What was that like for you to be in a place of discipline and structure and accountability?
Boy, let me tell you that when I say that I grew up in a matter of minutes, it's not a lie, man. No, man, I seem to thrive in a high tempo, high stress, high hyper vigilant type of environment. And I think it was, I couldn't tell you, man. I think that it was due to the trauma before, the constant hypervigilance and just trying the survival mode that I lived in transitioned very nicely into that high stress, high tempo environment. So I did pretty good, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. I was already good with marksmanship as a hunter and an outdoorsman. The hardest part for me was drill and ceremony, learning how to march, learning what commands were, call cadence, understand. If you ever heard a drill sergeant scream something at you, you get 2 words out of that gibberish, and you better know what he was saying. So it was difficult. It was the funnest thing I never want to do again in my life.
So you get through basic training, and you're glad that you got through that, and you're starting to develop as a man and understand all these things. When did you find out you were heading over to Afghanistan?
Oh man, so I joined in 2000. Come home and was getting ready to ship out to my AIT. 9/11 happened. I remember I walked into the school. I was drilling with my reserve unit at the time. So I walk into school that morning for school, and they've got like this big monitor in front of the doors when you walk in. And I seen that there was like news on it, like actual news, not school news. And so we start watching it, and everybody, like the bell rang, and there's still teachers and kids. Like school was just like the last thing on our agenda. We're watching our country being attacked. Mm-hmm. So as we watched the first tower fall, I get a phone call, and it was my readiness NCO. And he was like, "Hey, listen, we're doing a readiness drill. We've got some orders from up high that we might have an issue going on, and they want to do a readiness check. You have 1 hour to be to the unit, and we're going to do a gear inventory and all that." So I left school. I went to the unit and did that. In the process of that 3-day readiness drill, we got a warning order. We call them warnos, which says, "Hey, there's intelligence that we might be mobilized to go to a hostile foreign nation." We didn't know anything else. Mm-hmm. Then we go to Afghanistan. Like, I get to go with them again. They go in 2008, 2009. And while I was over there, like, me and a buddy of mine, we met in reception at Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri. Fort Lost in the Woods, we called it. His name was Daniel Wallace. Best friend I ever had, man. Like, really awkward kid from Dry Ridge, Kentucky. Like Southern Ohio, Cleveland, Ohio, Southern Ohio. I was from Ohio. So, like, we were initially, like, I'm an Ohio State fan. He's a UK fan. Like, that's how we met, was just joking around about football. And it turns out that everywhere we went, he ended up being in my unit. Everywhere I went with the military, he was there. And we deployed together. And I remember we were going through a dry riverbed one time. Our load was shifting. And we had it bindered down with chains. And we were carrying, like, computers, medical supplies for the surgical unit, ammo. Like, we had sensitive items on our trucks. And we were escorting that from Fob Organy to Fob Sharana, which was like a 3-day trip. It was like a 60-mile drive, but at 5 to 10 miles an hour clearing speed to look for IEDs, it took 2 days. Mm. So we get to a riverbed. The load's kind of rocking real bad on the trailer. They said, "Hey, you guys get out, check the load." He got out before I did. It looked like he fell. I jumped out of the back of the truck, and I noticed that it looked like somebody stomped on a ketchup packet. As soon as the trauma subsided, because I kind of went into a shock mode, but once I started to recover my senses, that same anger, that same hatred that I felt for homosexuals, that I felt for my dad sometimes, I now felt towards Muslims. Islam as a whole.
I was going to ask you, when did that start? And so that started as a result of your best friend dying.
Yeah.
Being murdered.
Yeah, that set in motion a series of events that forever, indefinitely altered my life.
Wow. So you have this you have this not newfound hatred, because it's a different hatred.
It was an ancient and just evil hatred.
But now it's going to be projected toward someone else or another group.
My growing list of enemies.
Yeah. So you didn't like homosexuals. You didn't like Muslims. Was anybody else you didn't like at that time?
No, and not really. I had very specific and, in my mind, justified reasons to hate an entire demographic of people. I was a soldier, man. I had men and women of all creeds, colors, nationalities that served with me, and to think of hating them was just, it didn't make sense. It was something that I couldn't fathom.
Wow.
But that changed as well.
How much longer were you in Afghanistan?
So that happened on October 31st of 2008. I was home by March 3rd of 2009. We got to Afghanistan in March of 2008. So the timeline: March, April, May, June, July, August, September, October. We had been there 7 months. November, December, January, February, March. 4 or 5 months later, we were back in the States. So March 3rd, March 13th, March 3rd, 2009, I got home. In May of 2009, our National Guard unit was activated again to go to a national disaster mission in Jackson, Kentucky. There was some floods and tornadoes, and it was a humanitarian and a human aid mission, which is where I met my wife, by the way. Was in Jackson, Kentucky on May 20th of 2009. I met my wife. So she was kind of seeing one of the lieutenants in our unit, who was like real mean and cruel to her because he was married, and he was just kind of like, she didn't know. She found out that night, and I had always looked at her, and I was like, this girl is amazing. She's gorgeous. I'm super attracted to her. And like, I'm a young soldier. I'm in my 20s, like mid-late 20s. And my battle buddy looked at me. We're hanging over the balcony of the motel that we were staying at while we were doing this aid mission, sipping beers. And he looks over and he was like, well, why don't you just go ahead and find out what size ring she wears now, man? I've never heard you talk about a girl like this. And I was like, dude, I've never even spoke to her. So chance has it, the hands of fate weave the strands, and we bump into each other at a gas station. She's getting slushies, and she's in front of me at the gas station, and I didn't need anything. I'd use the bathroom, but in order to get in line behind her, I had to grab something. So I grabbed the nastiest, like it was, I don't know if you ever had them, but a Zagnut candy bar, right? It's like coconut and peanut butter, and like, it's not my thing. I just grabbed something and jumped in line behind her, and I'm standing there with this candy bar. Like, so I don't know, man. It was weird. Like, I just wanted to see if I could like smell her hair. It was creepy, right? And I was like, so she turns around and she's got these 2 huge slushies, like 44 gulps for her and her friend. And as she turns around, boosh, right into me and just pours all over me. And she takes off out of the gas station, doesn't speak a word to me, just runs. I covered the cost of the slushies, and later that evening, I seen her at the motel. She had come by because they could come there and pick up jugs of water from the depot. So I see her, she gets in the car, and I run down there, and she's like rolling her window up. She doesn't want to talk to me. And I stick my arm in the window, and she's like rolling it up on my arm, and I'm like, please stop. This hurts. Like, I just want to talk. So she rolls her window down. We talk about pizza and beer. And I said, just give me an evening. Like, I'll buy pizza. I'll get us some drinks. We could sit on that big grassy hill over there and just talk about whatever. And she obliged and, like, never got pizza. To this day, me and my wife have never had pizza and beer on the same night. It's just it's a tradition. We can't do it because I feel like when that happens, her obligation to me is over and she's going to leave.
So no pizza beer on the same night. Don't do that.
No pizza beer on the same night. We can do it on opposite nights. But yeah, so on the way home, we made a deal, and I was like, I have to escort this convoy home. I was a sergeant by this time, and it was my convoy. All the vehicles had to go back to our unit, be inspected, check. But my car was back in our unit, and I said, I will go back to the unit. We will do our checks. We'll turn these vehicles in. I will get my car. I will drive back. Spend the weekend together. Like, yeah. I'll get a motel room. You can stay where you're staying, and we'll meet up every morning. We'll just spend time together. She loved it. So she waited. On the way home, the axle on the vehicle I was driving snapped, and I flipped it 1 end over end and 7 barrel rolls. And I broke my back in the accident. There was a period of time where we didn't know if I was going to be able to walk again. And that was my introduction to opiate painkillers. That was the key that unlocked Pandora's box. Like, I heal up from that. And now I'm like full-time, like on the injured reserve list. I'm still drilling, but I'm like not really as part of the unit as I used to be.
Mm-hmm.
I'm waiting on the 2013 for my ETS date. I'm getting out of the Army because they tell me we're going to med board you. You can't even take a PT test.
Right.
You can't do push-ups. You can't do sit-ups. You can't run. Like, what can you do? You can't pass a PT test. We're med boarding you. So I, on my own accord, decided that my time with the U.S. Army was done. During this time, I'd started really paying attention to the social climate. When you're in the Army, when you're in the military, there's not a whole lot of room for politics. No Republican, Democrat politics. There's no place for it in our service. So I start paying attention to the things, what's going on in my world, what's going on in my country. What do I need to get up to speed on? I think it's very important to note that I voted for Obama first time, and I didn't vote for him the second time. So I come out and I start instantly, people are starting to project me into a box, right? You Republican or Democrat? I don't know. I never thought about it. Like, I don't know what's the difference, right? Like, how do I know if I'm a Republican or a Democrat? Well, are you pro-life or pro-choice? Well, there's a gray area there. I feel like there's some times that would warrant like an abortion, and then there's other times that shouldn't be optional. Like, I think dads should be able to play a part in that if they want to, right? Like, I just have a really gray area. Like, and my gray area is really wide. And people are like, well, you have to, like, you can't be both. So this is around the time that Obama was issuing the things we're gonna destroy this Confederate style of. And like, as a soldier, I'm really into my military history, right? Valley Forge, the Civil War, the World War I, World War II. Those are all relevant to me. It's things that all our bases are named after U.S. generals. Some Civil War generals from the Confederate side. So I know my history on that, and I'm like, why are they attacking the Confederate soldiers? Like, they're dead, right? Like, this is an attack on like the Confederacy. Like, I didn't understand it. So I was confused about that. And then, like, because I didn't want to say that I was like against police reform, or I was for police reform, or I was all lives matter or Black Lives Matter. So instantly I'm referred to as a racist. Instantly I'm doxxed as being a white supremacist or racist against the Black community or sexist. I mean, and then the drugs on top of that were spiraling out of control. There was no oversight from the military. There was no accountability. I was able to take 5 Oxycontin 80s in a day if I wanted to. And a friend of mine was like, hey, those are really expensive. Have you tried heroin? And I was like, no, what is it? It's just non-pharmaceutical opium. So I became a heroin addict almost immediately. Like, the first time I did it, I was in love with it. I was very scarred from PTSD, from what was going on in society. I didn't leave my house, bro. Like, I just stay in my house, play Call of Duty on the headset. And I had one friend that I did drugs with. Comes over one night, he's like, hey, we're going clubbing tonight. And I was like, no, we are not. Like, I don't want to go out there. It's scary out there. I just want to stay here. I'm safe. We can do drugs here. And we can play Call of Duty. And he's like, I'm tired of Call of Duty, man. Like, here, I got some heroin. I got some dope. So he cuts out 2 lines. I snort my line. Immediately, my face is burning and it gets hot. And I was like, what the hell was that? He goes, oh, that was meth. And we went clubbing that night. I was socially interactable with people, and I felt like amazing. And I found that the first love of my life was crystal meth. And that unlocked the anger. Meth unlocked the anger. And I remember we were in a club, and I was listening to a couple of girls talk about, they were just having a conversation. You know how you overhear conversations? And I remember I just got angry. And I was like, I ain't never done nothing to you. Why is it my problem? What's the problem with me? Right. And I just remember at that point, I was like, I looked down at my hands and I was like, you know what, man? Like, this is becoming a divided society. There's going to be a violent clash between these two cultures. And if I'm going to survive this, that survival theme again, I better click up with the right people.
So the meth unlocked the anger. And then you had this situation, this interracial situation that sent you into a space.
And I was already upset. I was already upset because the girls at the club had like no interaction with them at all. But I'm hearing them like talk about whitey and crackers and the white people are the problem. And I'm like, maybe you are the problem. And like I was like, where did that come from? And I was like, I like it. Stand up for yourself. And like I just had this epiphany that I'm gonna stand up for myself and I'm gonna do it every chance I get because I like the way it made me feel. I like the adrenaline. I like the source of power that it created inside of me.
How did you get from that place to the Klan?
I was angry and I was like, you know what? This is ridiculous. Got online. I'm like, how can I protect the white race? Google will never let you down. Google will give you what you ask for. And I found websites for the Loyal White Knights of the Ku Klux Klan. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to do it. I'm going to see what they're about. So I get on there and I realize that there's like Bible scripture. There's things like who can be mad at Christian? Like who can be mad at somebody for being a Christian? I wasn't, but by God, maybe I should find Jesus. And so I get in there and I'm looking and it's like very family oriented. It shows pictures of like these really like generic pictures of like white families at barbecues, right? And I was like, who doesn't like barbecues? I love Jesus and barbecues. And it became spiteful. So I put my information in. And the next day I got a call back from a guy named Roy Benburton. I don't mind doxing him. He's just what he does to people is just uncalled for. So the world needs to know what he does. And he recruits vulnerable people into extremist groups. That's his whole job for the KKK. So he calls me back. We start talking and, you know, I'm angry at this point. I tell him the story about the club. I tell him the story about my sister. And he's like, yeah, man, oh, that's so sad. I'm sorry you're going through that. He finds out I was in the military. We talked for like 3.5 hours that night. And at the end of it, he was like, Chris, I think you're a really cool dude, man. Like, man, you should come over and just, you know, we can have some drinks. I can introduce you to my family and, you know, you can get comfortable. Maybe you can introduce me to your family someday and I can introduce you to some of my friends. And I was like, are they those guys? And he was like, well, some of them and some of them ain't. And, you know, you've got to meet people if you want to pursue this. And I was like, well, what the heck could a couple of drinks and a barbecue hurt? So I go and I realized that they have meth. Well, I love the meth. And I didn't know you could do meth and love Jesus and barbecues too. So we did a lot of meth and I stayed gone for 3 days with these people. And by the time I got home, I was like, pack your stuff. We're joining the Klan. And my wife's like, mortified. Like, Christopher, what are you talking about? You're crazy. No. And I was like, well, I'm doing it anyway. So I got a bag packed and I went and I started staying with this guy. And there was sex, drugs, money, there was everything and I felt powerful. All my hatred towards the homosexuals and the Muslims and wanting to achieve this crazy idea of racial purity, right? I started the indoctrination process. So about a month later, they said, we're going to vote on you tonight. And I was like, what do you mean vote on me? They was like, we're going to vote to see if we want to let you in. And I was like, okay. So they vote. They were like, you were voted to begin the rituals of joining. So there's all these weird things that you got to do. Like you got to go trust your brothers to lead you through the woods with a blindfold on to the secret meeting spot. Then you do a cross-light ceremony and they haze you severely for like 2 days to find out if you're law enforcement. It was bad. I was gone for like a week that time. When I come back, I was a full-fledged Nighthawk in the local chapter of my Ku Klux Klan.
You Google what you were feeling and you found something to follow. And then when you start to follow it, it had elements of your own pain and misery there that you were familiar with. So you got comfortable with what you were familiar with. And then it went down this other path, and you're a Nighthawk. What does that mean? What is a Nighthawk?
So they're the militant version of the Klan. They're the ones that provide security to the functions. They're always armed. And they'll be the ones that you see when everybody else is wearing white robes, they're wearing a black one. So they can blend in the dark if they have to, so, I mean, we keep the women and children safe. We provide security at events that are Klan organized. And they'll always have a skull and crossbones on their uniform, a big skull and crossbones with a KKK in the head. Wow. So they're the violent tract of the Klan. And we know that the Klan's violent, but they're more politically passive aggressive, right? Especially nowadays. I'm not talking like the 60s Klan. I'm talking like this new Klan. They don't want to do the violence and become charged and arrested. They want to hire guys like the NSM or other white supremacist gangs that can do their violent stuff for them.
And what was it that began to make you realize, I mean, your wife had told you not to do this. You did it anyway.
Yeah.
What was it that made you realize, you know what, I need to get out of this. I need to change.
Oh, man. I want to say that there was one aha moment. And I mean, it feels so bad to try to boil it down to one person, because there were so many people in my journey that helped me heal, and I don't want to leave them out, but know that for the specifics of that question, that I'm going to say that as weird as this sounds, it was my wife. My wife she sounded like me when she was like, "Oh, so you're just gonna Google how to protect the white race?" Well, I'm gonna Google how do I get my loved one out of a hate group. So there was nothing, right? But there was stories about Arno, and she started reading Arno's story, and she found his Life After Hate Twitter handle, and she sent him a message. She was like, "You don't know me, but." I can't remember the email. I know that if I read it to this day, it brings me tears. And so, Arno, being the just amazing human being that he is, like, "Hey, I'm so sorry you're going through this. How long's he been in?" Asked all the questions. He was like, it's going to be hard, and I can't tell you that it's going to be possible, but I'll do everything in my power to help him. And he flew from Milwaukee all the way to Georgia, rural Northeast Georgia. And rather than attack my ideology, he attacked the fact that I needed sobriety. And by this point, I don't know if you have had any experience with somebody that had substance abuse issues, made it into recovery, and some that don't. You'll never talk to an addict that says, "No, I just enjoy being an addict. I love this lifestyle. It's what I want to do. I don't want to get a job and take care of I just want to be high all the time." It becomes a sickness. So I was miserable by this point already. I was 100 pounds. That's it. So instead of wearing a sheet and a pointy hat, even when I was just in normal clothes, I just looked like there was a sheet draped over a skeleton. I was so tiny. When I come out of the Army, I was 230 pounds and I was solid. When I come out of the Klan, I was maybe 110.
So your life was literally
on the line.
I mean, you were withering away.
I was. And the funny thing that I didn't realize at the time, and I realize now since I've been doing so much work on, like, for me, the most important thing is to understand the why. Like, who cares about the what's, right? What drug did you use? What hate group were you in? What gang were you a part of? It doesn't matter. None of that matters. We focus so much on the what that we lose the why, right? And that's why I'm so happy that you're asking these questions, because you're not focusing on the what, you're focusing on the why, and that's awesome. That's what I've been doing, and I realized that much as I wanted to just put a gun in my mouth and pull the trigger, I was scared. I was a coward. I wanted to think about death, but I wouldn't commit to it. So in a way, the drugs were my suicide attempt. If I was going to go, I wanted to be intoxicated to a point where I didn't maybe realize it as much. So in reality, I tried every day for 5 years to kill myself. So Arno challenged the addiction. And as soon as he said, I can help you find sobriety, Chris, we've got to get you sober. You're going to die and your family needs you. I broke down in tears. I remember there's a picture out there of me sitting on this dilapidated shack porch that I lived in with my wife and 2 kids. That was all I could afford because the other money I made, I had to buy my drugs with. And he was hugging me. And I remember, you could tell, just like I was so red in the head from just like ugly crying into this complete stranger's neck, right? Like snot all over him and tears. And he didn't care. He just hugged me tighter. I'm just reminiscing, man. Like that hug, I needed a hug, man. And Arno's the one that gave me the hug. And so that started this organic relationship, this friendship. And then Arno told me about his experience. And with a sober mind can always come a sober heart. And you don't want to try to make a heart sober without getting the mind sober. There was a lot of pushback. I mean, like, to think that this was like this really happy and happy ending story, it wasn't. It was ugly. I pulled a gun on Arno. I got so angry with him that I said the most hurtful things because I wanted to push him away. And I had become just as addicted to the hate as I was to the meth and to the heroin and to the substances. And that, my friend, is the most profound thing in the world to me. That it's understandable that we can become addicted to a substance. It's a material thing that our body becomes dependent on. But an idea, a feeling, like, and then I started to think about, well, there's people who are addicted to sex.
Right.
That's a feeling. That's not a substance. Well, if they could be addicted to sex, and people can be addicted to gambling or addicted to lying, can you be addicted to hate? So I go back to the program that I graduated from, and I said, hey, Miss so-and-so, I'm not going to dox her name because she was an angel too. I said, can a person be addicted to a feeling the way they can a substance? Well, no, like substances are addictive properties and chemicals, and you can't be addicted to something that doesn't exist. And I'm like, okay. So that's a tangible answer. But it resonates. I've got to find out, like, why I feel like this. So I remember I talked to Arno. Arno put me in touch with Miriam Churchill, who's the director at Parents for Peace. And I said, Miriam, is this possible? She goes, well, from a clinician standpoint, it's plausible. I mean, like, it could be. The brain's an amazing thing, Chris. And we can't process some of the things that it's capable of. And I'm like, okay, cool. So there's a conflicting answer. So I printed out the list that I had compiled about warning signs, red flags, that somebody's getting groomed or brought into extremism or radicalized. And I printed out the list for the same thing for substance abuse. And I took it back to that counselor with no label. And I said, what are these? And she looked at them. She goes, these are substance abuse traits. I was like, only one of them is. Which one? And she picked the wrong one. And I said, thank you. This is the list I compiled that gives the warning and red flags that somebody might be in danger or journeying and venturing into this dark realm of grooming, ideology, radicalization, extremism. And she goes, that is fascinating. She goes, so, Mr. Buckley, what are you going to do with this information? And that was the beginning. That was the beginning of my work with Parents for Peace. Miriam Churchill had been watching me. Arno's on the advisory board of Parents for Peace and said, since you know Arno, I always do an impression of Arno. And he's like, hey, so you got to meet this Chris guy. He's like super cool homie from the movement. And yeah, he's really intelligent. Blah, blah. So there's my one free Arno impression for every podcast I talk about.
Well, let me tell you something. For those of you who don't know who Arno is, or you haven't heard him non-podcast voice, or even podcast voice, that was pretty good.
I remember that Miriam called me and she was like, Chris, I've been watching you for so long. We're a very small organization. Arno thinks so highly of you. And I just wanted to have a conversation. Me and Miriam had like a really long conversation about what I was doing, what I was trying to work on, what I wanted to achieve, where I seen myself going with this gift that I had been given of recovery from hate, and being a former, how I wanted to use that platform. And me and Miriam built a really organic relationship. And I still, to this day, I've been with them for years, and I call her Mama Miriam, wow. Right? Everybody else calls her Miss Churchill or Miriam. I call her Mama. Like, you know, so she's very influential to me, and I've learned so much from her. But she kind of said the same thing. She was like, I can't tell you it is, and I can't tell you that it isn't. So I started everything I'd been through recovery from substances. Started going through everything that I was dealing with in recovery from hate and extremism and the ideology and becoming normal again. And like, I want to throw this out there that when a former leaves, and they come home and they reintegrate, it's like somebody coming home from war. They're different. They're not, there's no real normal for them. Mm. It's their new normal, right? Same thing with substance abuse. You know, some people you meet and you're like, fried their brain on drugs. Like, they're sober, but they're different, right? And I'm one of those different people. So I always put a disclaimer, results not typical, right? At the bottom of what I'm saying. So I'm still struggling with the ideology. I'm still struggling with the things that I'm seeing in society. I'm starting to realize just how divisive our political structure, our media structure is. Mm-hmm. And so Arno introduces me to Mubin Sheikh. I don't know if you've met him. Would be an amazing guest to have on the podcast and would kind of complete some of this story for you. Mubin was the first Muslim I ever spoke to. And I would tell Arno, I'd be like, we can talk about gays. We can talk about this or that, but Muslims are off the table, bro. Like, we're not talking about that. Like, we're not. That's off limits. Like, I'm going to hate them till I die. And you don't get to change that. That's my choice. And he was like, all right, cool. I want to introduce you to my friend Mubin, and he's a Muslim. And I'm like, why, man? Like, no respect for my boundaries. But it's because my boundaries weren't respectable, right? So Arno was very confrontational in his intervention style, which is what I needed, right? Like, because I'm very smart and cerebral, and I will manipulate you to just leave me alone.
Yep.
And so Arno knew that, and he's kind of the same way, I gather, because he manipulated me before I could manipulate him. But yeah, so I met Mubin, and he was the first Muslim I ever talked to, and we had a long talk about what I perceived Islam to be. And as offensive as I was, he responded with kindness, peacefulness, and compassion. And that, besides Arno and my wife, like, the person that was my lady at McDonald's was Mubin Sheikh. And he's an amazing colleague that I work with very closely at Parents for Peace now. We're on the same team. We do the same things. And whenever we're together, we always talk about that meeting. And he's like, dude, if we'd have been in person, I would have punched you in the mouth. He was like, but we were on Zoom. What can I do? I just tolerated it and responded to court. And now, like, we consult.
You said that Mubin was the first Muslim you talked to. But you hated Muslims. Did you have any other experiences with them, like anything? Like,
no, Arno was very, very crafty. He had to, like, Arno challenged all of my ideas and my beliefs. Very in your face and aggressively challenged. Like, we went to visit I didn't like Mexicans, right? So we went to eat Mexican food, and I was like, I was that white supremacist that only liked chicken nuggets because they were the only true all white meat.
Okay,
right? Like, I lived on chicken nuggets, dude. Like, it was crazy. It was just so crazy and profound, the ideology that I took part in.
So I want to talk about the importance of perspective, perseverance, and partnerships in your transformation process.
Yeah.
And we're going to start with perspective, because I believe that perspective drives everything else in your life, because how you see something will determine how you attack it.
Yeah.
So how important was perspective for you? And when did you have a perspective switch go on?
So imagine that your cameras, right? And think of like a nice Canon camera, and you've got your lens on, and you're looking, and you're like, this just isn't right. It's not good. And so you change your lens. Now you've got a new perspective, and you're like, this is beautiful. This is the picture I want, right? I had to learn that I have to change my lens if something doesn't look right, or be willing to look at it through a different perspective. So the imagery that I got about Islam was through such a narrow lens that I couldn't focus on the bigger picture. And I associated all of Islam with that very narrow lens that I experienced it through. Mm-hmm. I associated every homosexual, especially like males, through that very narrow lens of molestation, right? And that's the lens that I used to view that. Well, I couldn't use that lens because it wasn't appropriate. And once somebody was like, hey, stupid, change your lens, I'm like, oh my God, this is beautiful. I didn't know I could do that.
Perseverance. What does perseverance mean to you?
Man, the day that I don't persevere my obstacle is the day that I lose. And I'm not going to lose. I can't lose.
Because I thought
as Puff Daddy would say, as Diddy would say, can't stop, won't stop.
Because I thought about perseverance when you talked about your suicide attempt and thinking about suicide, but you didn't stop. Part of your story to me is that you have not stopped, and you keep living, and each moment you get to live and to have a chance to change not only your life, but other people's lives is the byproduct of your perseverance.
Yeah. I never thought of it that way. I have an amazing drive of just overcoming things, man. And I like nothing that I can face in my life is going to beat me. And I look at all the things that I've overcome, both individually and collectively, and it's like, I'm over the mountain. Nothing in front of me could be more than just a hill or a speed bump. And that's where the perspective comes into play.
And you've gone from substance addiction, you added addiction to hate. So you went from a substance to a feeling to now to this victorious mindset that you're addicted to now. I mean, you know what I think I'm addicted to
more than, what I think I'm addicted to? Honestly, I'm addicted to knowing that somebody can benefit from my pain. And the more I put
You
it
know
out
what?
there, the more I can help people.
You know what that is? That's purpose. You're addicted to purpose.
That's it.
And your purpose drives you to overcome obstacles, which drives you to help other people.
I like it. I
Finally.
will allow it.
Finally, partnerships.
Like that's super important in the work that I do now. I look at every organization out there doing the work in the space that we're doing, and even outside of the space that we're doing it in. And the more partnerships, the more we can come together for this idea of unifying our country when it's at its greatest need to be unified. Partnerships are of the utmost importance. I can't put a label as to how important it is for people to put their self aside and work for the greater accomplishment of giving back people to their families and to their community. And, everybody has a place, from the tip of the spear to the rear with the gear. We've all got a job, and, everybody has something they can contribute to this fight. You have time, but no money or skill. But donate your time. You have skill, but no time or money. Well, donate the skill. You have money, but no skill or time, then donate the money. And it's like me. I have a skill in this area, and I don't have a lot of money. So all my time goes to donating my skill. And that's what I want to spend the rest of my life doing. And since I've been with Parents for Peace, I've met the most amazing people and had the most amazing opportunities, and actually got to speak in front of Congress last week at the House Veterans Affairs Committee. And the last one was a nightmare, dude. They were just fighting and bickering and butting heads with each other. And I want to think that my testimony to Congress unified and created a bipartisan approach, that Chairman Takano, Chairman Boss looked at each other at the end and said, we need to do better. We can do better. And we got to stop letting ourselves be divided by party lines. So they looked at each other and said, let's bring it back to the same team. And I cried. I cried in front of Congress, man.
You know what? Crying is a good thing. If you laugh, cry, and smile, and one day you have had a pretty fun.
And I've done, and just to throw it out, I've done all three of those in this short time that I've been with you, and thank you for that. It always feels good to laugh, and man, it feels good to cry sometimes too.
Yeah. Well, let me tell you, this has been great. The work that you're doing with Parents for Peace, helping people to transition and move out. Partnerships are essential, because this is emotionally intensive work that you're doing, and people need to support it. So if they are interested in contacting you or Parents for Peace, what's the best way for them to get a hold of you, Chris?
So we have the very first non-governmental funded helpline that's accessible to the United States, Canada, across the world. And that number is 1-844-49-PEACE. And then if they just wanted to get in touch with Parents for Peace, if they're concerned about a loved one, or they themselves want to reach out and try to get away from this, or just to make a donation, because we're non-government funded. We fund ourselves by donations from people that believe in what we do. They can visit our website at www.parents4peace.org and reach out to us that way.
Okay. Thank you, Chris, for your time. Thank you for your service. Thank you for the work that you're doing. People need to know that there's hope even when you're in the grip of addiction, whether it's substance or hatred or whatever it might be. And your message is letting people know that. And you know what? You're letting people know you don't have to be perfect either. You've talked about it. You've talked about your struggle. You still deal with, but you're not what, you know what? You may not be what you want to be just yet, but you're not what you used to be. And I think that right there is enough to be proud of.
Hey, that's something.
So, man, thank you so much. Now, listen, I need you to send me your address because, every guest gets 2 copies of my book. One I'll sign for you and one I'll sign for you to give as a gift to someone else. So you make
Oh
sure.
my God, that's amazing. I'm honored. Thank you. I will add it to my collection.
No problem.
But yours is signed, so I feel really honored. Thank you so much for that.
Until next time, on Paralysis to Purpose, the podcast, this is David Cooks reminding you that your ability to endure is always greater than your willingness to endure.
You can do anything you put your mind to.
Thanks for tuning in to Paralysis to Purpose. Don't forget to follow us on social media at Paralysis to Purpose on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok. To purchase his book, visit davidcookspeaks.com. Be sure to tune in next time for more inspiring conversations with David Cooks.
Whenever something really, really bad happens to you, you no doubt ask yourself the question, why me, why this, and why now? And those questions are so hard to answer because you're looking for a purpose, you're looking for a reason for something completely unreasonable to happen to you.
Next time on Paralysis to Purpose.
I'd like to welcome Paul Strickwarda to the podcast today.
Because I believe that a lot of bad things that happen to people are completely unreasonable. We didn't ask for, we don't deserve, and yet they happen. And you have to give that a place, you have to give that a meaning. And a meaning for me is that something good can come out of something bad.
Paralysis to purpose.